of you have ever put a puzzle together before? Puzzles are interesting things. They're made up of hundreds and sometimes even thousands of specially shaped pieces in just the right way. And what you'll find is that every piece is needed in order to complete that puzzle. Now, try to imagine a giant puzzle. One that is so big that it would fill up the entire Earth, the sky, outer space, made of billions and billions and billions of pieces, more pieces than you could even possibly count. Well, if you think about it, there's sort of a puzzle that is like that. The Bible begins by telling us in Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God's creation is like a giant puzzle. He has specially designed and shaped every single piece of his creation to all fit perfectly together. Here we find just a tiny example of that in Psalm 104. Psalm 104 starts by saying this in verse 10. You make springs gush forth in the valleys. They flow between the hills. They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. Besides them, the birds of the heavens dwell. They sing among the branches. Jump to verse 14. You cause the grass to grow for the livestock and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth. So here in these verses, you can see how these many different pieces of God's puzzle work together, right? God made the earth's soil to provide a good place for seed to sprout. God made the sun to give energy for plants to grow. God made rain to water the plants. God created bees to pollinate flowers so they can produce all kinds of delicious foods. God created man with the ability to plant and harvest that food. Every piece of God's creation is wonderfully designed, even to the tiniest things. How was God able to create such a marvelous world? Well, if you're still there in Psalm 104, and you jump to verse 24, it says this, O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. God made everything in and by wisdom. That means that the eternal God of the universe created all things according to a glorious plan. He knew how to design and create everything to fit and work together perfectly in order to finish that plan. So when we say that God is wise, what we're saying is that he causes everything to work out perfectly. But God's wisdom goes beyond his creation. His wisdom is also seen in the many ways that he acts in this world, especially in how he acts in the lives of his people. I think one of the many great examples that we have in Scripture is the account of Joseph in the book of Genesis. In Genesis chapter 28, we learn that God promised to make a man named Jacob and his 12 sons into a great nation called Israel. They were to be God's specially chosen people. God planned to bless the whole world through Israel. Jacob's favorite son was Joseph. In Genesis 37, we see that Joseph had some interesting dreams. One in which Joseph saw himself in a position of power over his father and his brothers. Well, this made his brothers very angry. So angry that they felt like killing Joseph. But instead, they decided to sell Joseph as a slave. And he was taken to Egypt. To cover up what they did, the brothers told their dad Jacob that Joseph had been killed by a fierce animal. But while Joseph was a slave in Egypt, God was with him. Joseph did his work so well that he was put in charge of many things. Things were going great for him, at least as good as it could be for a slave. But then one day Joseph was thrown into prison, even though he did nothing wrong. Years later, Joseph was sent to meet with Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Why? Well, Pharaoh had learned that Joseph could interpret dreams, and Pharaoh had this dream that was really bothering him, and no one could help him out. But God, through Joseph, was able to interpret that dream to Pharaoh. Joseph told him that the dream meant that there was going to be 7 years of plenty in Egypt, followed by 7 years of famine. So people needed to store up food during those first 7 years in order to survive that famine. Pharaoh was so impressed with Joseph that he made Joseph in charge of the whole process, really making him the second most powerful in the world at that time. Well, just like Joseph said was going to happen, the famine came. And not only did that famine affect Egypt, but it also affected Joseph's father and his brothers as well. God's chosen people, Israel, was in danger of starving to death. And so Jacob sent Joseph's brothers to Egypt to buy food. Long story short, there they discovered that Joseph was still alive. God brought their family back together, and Joseph was able to save Israel. I'd encourage you and your family to go through and read that whole account, because there are so many different pieces to that story. And to us, some of those pieces maybe at first don't really seem like they fit, right? I mean, Joseph being hated by his brothers, being sold as a slave, spending 10 years of his life in prison. But in the end, you can clearly see that God knew exactly what he was doing. From the very beginning, God planned to save his people by sending Joseph to Egypt. Nothing happened by chance. Even what we might call the bad parts of the story were meant to complete God's plan. Remember, God is wise. He causes everything to work out perfectly. It was true in Joseph's day, and it's the same God that we serve today. So if that is who God is and what he is like, let me ask this. Knowing this, how should you and I act towards God? Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." May that be true of every single one of us.